So we're doing the last chapter of Heller's book, of Rebbetzin Tzipporah Heller's book on feminism, called Judaism and Feminism. Chapter 6 is called Marriage. And she has some very nice little insights about marriage and about men and women, and, all from a Torah perspective, obviously. So let's begin. We'll jump right in, and if there's questions, please stop me. So the first commandment that God gave to Adam and humankind was to marry. More specifically, be fruitful and multiply is the exact words he uses towards Adam. Be fruitful and multiply. So meaning you have to get married and you have to produce, you have to reproduce, you have to populate the earth. Okay. The mitzvah, so it is one of the 613 mitzvos for a man to get married and reproduce. The mitzvah is directed towards the man. It's he has to produce, at least to sort of fulfill the commandment, he has to produce one son and one daughter, and then his commandment is fulfilled. And that's naturally because then that way he is replenishing the generation, right? He's reproducing his generation. Women were not obligated in marriage, so women are not obligated to get married and reproduce. The main reason that the rabbis give is what?
Well, they're not obligated, but it's kind of impossible for the men to.
Correct. So one of the answers that Heller gives is women have a natural desire to be mothers. Women have a natural, we hear our biological clocks ticking, and so there isn't a need to have to make a commandment about something that's going to happen anyway. The most ambitious, women today, career-driven. At some point, most of them, of course there are exceptions, most of them feel this need to have a child and to have a relationship, if not a child, right? So that's one reason given. The main reason that's given as to why women are not obligated in procreation is that the Torah never requires, us to do a mitzvah in the ordinary course of events if something is going to be life-threatening. In other words, childbirth is a life-threatening ordeal. At least it has been until very, very, very recently. And so therefore the Torah doesn't obligate us to risk our lives in the normal course of events. You don't have to endanger yourself for the sake of a mitzvah. And that's the main reason the rabbis give.
So if a man is married to a woman who does have that risk, like she's been told it's not safe for her to do it, then he's sort of stuck though. Or is he supposed to marry someone?
Well, you're talking about an exception to the general rule. You're saying a woman who... We're saying generally speaking here. What I'm saying is the rabbis say, generally speaking, childbirth is fraught with danger. Right. So therefore, the Torah, Hashem didn't want to say you have to go through it, right? But now you're saying something different.
On the man's side, if he's married to someone and let's say they do have a risk for their life, if they
right, then he is stuck. He is stuck. Yeah.
So then
so if there is such a woman who learns after marriage, let's say, that, because I assume if she knew that before marriage, she would have told him that she can't have children, that she would be risking her life and he would seek someone else.
See, that's so sad.
It would be sad. It would be sad. But if he marries a woman and then they find out that they just, for some reason, she is at a high risk and she should not get pregnant, if after 10 years a couple doesn't have children, then they divorce. They should divorce. Assuming they both want it. Obviously, you don't have to, but in other words, that's legal grounds for divorce. Now again, it has to be mutual. It could absolutely be the guy, but still, in that case, it would be beneficial for her to seek another partner, if they want kids more than they want each other.
Okay,
right?
If you adopt a child, is it the same? Does it have the same?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm not sure. I have to write that one down.
10 minutes in a way.
Sorry.
No, it's great.
Sorry.
No. I should tell my husband, set aside at about 11:30 every Wednesday, set aside 10 minutes for us to call you with these questions. So I don't know, that's a good question. That is a very good question. My guess would be no, because revu means multiply yourself rather than save someone else, right? So I don't know. It's a good question. Okay, so what is the Torah's concept of marriage? What does marriage entail? So we talked a lot in the past about the phrase ezer kenegdo, which is the phrase that Hashem uses regarding Adam, when he says, I'm going to create someone for him, I'm going to create a partner for him. That's the expression Hashem uses for her purpose. I'm going to create an ezer kenegdo, a helper, that's going to be against him, right? And so this phrase is fraught with a lot of questions itself, because it's a contradictory phrase. Helper is not against him. Against him can't be a helper. And so a lot of commentary about this. What does it mean? What does it mean to be a helper against him? So first of all, the help is not a physical help. She's not required. She wasn't created to do his laundry and iron his shirts. How do we know this? Because she was created in the Garden of Eden. In the Garden of Eden, there was no need. First of all, they didn't wear clothing. There were no physical needs that they had. That was one of the great benefits of living in the Garden of Eden. Right. All their physical needs were met automatically, right? They had food at the drop of an apple, right? There was no need to prepare food. There was no need to prepare clothing. So it can't be a physical help that Hashem was referring to here. So what the help is that we're talking about is a spiritual help, right? So after the sin, we now had physical challenges. So we do have the need for iron shirts and cooked meals, but her help is still a spiritual help. It's not the requirement that she has to bake him a nice cake at night. All right. Now it doesn't also mean, by the way, that he doesn't help her, right? Just because she's created as the helpmeet doesn't mean he doesn't have an obligation, that he doesn't get to sit back and with his feet up and not put into the relationship, right, what she's putting in. But what it does mean is that because men and women were created differently, right, each one provides what the other lacks. So the implicit idea is that she has a larger contribution to make to his spiritual well-being and growth than he has to make to her spiritual well-being and growth. In other words, she can get on better without him in the spiritual realm, whereas he needs her more than she needs him, basically. That's the idea. Obviously, Hashem wants both the men and women to achieve their spiritual potential, right? So we have to understand that her helping him in no way also, takes away from her growth, right? In other words, if all she's doing is helping him, then doesn't that maybe imply that that she's neglecting her own spiritual well-being? But what it is that she is the act of helping him is part of her spiritual growth as well. Okay, and proof of this is there's an idea of this in the Eishes Chayil poem, that the idea that she grows, her praise is his growth, basically. The Eishes Chayil poem, which we did study, we read it, and wet nose on ankle. It's okay, it's all right. I happen to be wearing short socks today and a short skirt. No, it's fine. So in the Eishes Chayil poem, we have the praise of the ideal woman, the ideal Jewish woman. And in the midst of this poem, line after line, praising her for doing this, for doing that. She's this. She's a balas chesed. She's a smart woman. She's a businesswoman. All of a sudden, there's a line about her husband that he is well known in the gates, and he is well known for when he sits with the elders in the gates. So the question is, why are we suddenly praising him if this is a poem all about her? And again, it's coming to teach this idea that she is the one given the credit for everything that he is. Okay, she's the power behind the throne, as it were. We have to also remember that Ezer, helper, does not imply anything in terms of the relative the comparative status, right, in terms of inferior or superior one to the other. Each is important to the degree of contribution that they make. So the one being helped is accomplishing a goal, and the helper is helping that to be realized. So, for example, it's like, there's a difference if I say, like, if I'm baking a cake in the kitchen, and my child comes and says, "Can I help you?" Okay, so I'm accepting the help of my 7-year-old. So that's a very different kind of help than if you have a situation like in an airplane where you have a pilot and a navigator. And the pilot is piloting the plane, but the navigator is so crucial, a quote-unquote help, right? He's helping the pilot, but that help is so crucial that it's equalizing their relationship, because without the navigator, one cannot function without the other. So that's the kind of help that we're talking about here. Okay. Similarly, as I mentioned before, you have the situation with a doctor and a patient, right? The doctor is helping the patient, but without that relationship, you can't say that the doctor is a lower status than the patient, right? It's a crucial help. So to here, now the stereotypical idea of like a Jewish wife, what a Jewish wife does, or what that is very distorted. The cultural view of that. Fiddler on the Roof, for example, showed a very typical or stereotypical woman who is subservient to her husband, meek and quiet. So we don't have that sort of idea of what a marriage is and what the relationship is between husband and wife. The legal ground rules and the historical reality, were very different. So a husband, we know that the marriage ceremony is one in which the husband, quote unquote, acquires his wife, right? There is an acquisition being made where he gives her the ksuba, her marriage contract, and a ring, and he acquires her. It's sort of like a business contract, right? Marriage is called a kinyan, meaning acquisition. But it's a different sort of acquisition from if I say I'm acquiring, let's say, a toaster. Right? If I own a toaster, right, I can throw it away. I can give it away. I can sell it. I can bang it up. I can abuse it. I can pour water in it because I own it. None of those things apply from a husband to a wife. A husband does not have that kind of relationship. He cannot buy her, throw her away, give her away, abuse her. He has obviously very clear legal grounds. So what does the acquisition mean? It means that she belongs to him like she's part of himself. She becomes part of his being, and he becomes part of hers. We just read Megillas Rus on Shavuos, and in Megillas Rus is a very interesting line, a pasuk at the very end, when Boaz is going to marry Rus, and he's agreeing to the transaction of buying the property of Naomi, her mother-in-law, as well as the property of Rus, and he's also agreeing to marry Rus. And in the pasuk, he is very distinct. He says, "I'm going to acquire Rus's the property." I don't remember exactly what word he uses. I'm going to acquire the property, and then the next pasuk, a separate pasuk, it says, "And I'm also acquiring Rus." And so the commentators, of course, point out that he is deliberately making a distinction, saying, "I am not acquiring Rus the way I'm acquiring her property." So that's not how we understand what the acquisition of marriage is. In terms of the interpersonal relationship of the husband and wife, nobody's the boss. The man's not the boss of the woman, but ideally there should be an equality in terms of meeting of the minds. Agreement should be reached on important matters. If there is not agreement on important matters, Jewish law says that the man's domain is things of heaven, quote unquote, those having to do with religious aspects of the home, like which customs they're going to follow, right? Which is, we know that when a couple gets married, the wife usually adopts the customs, or what we call minhagim, of the husband. I really like that in my case, because I went from 6 hours between meat and milk to 3 hours. So that was a win for me. And I also went from non-gebrux to gebrux on Pesach. So that was lovely for me. Huh? What?
When it's wet, like it's the
Gebracht? Gebracht is when is food on Pesach that where you have matzah products.
No, where you wet the
Matzah products that are with liquid. So let's say either on a very plain level, crumbling matzah into your soup. If you don't eat gebracht, you would not be allowed to do that. On a more and then in a more baking with matzah meal would be another thing. Yeah. So I got that. You asking?
So it's a custom, but let's say for whatever reason,
Right.
Let's say it was the reverse or something. Like is there a thing that says you must follow what the husband's? I know it's recommended or it's.
I don't think it's a hard and fast rule. No, I mean because minhag. I mean, ideally it shouldn't be changed. Let's say my husband. His minhag of gebracht, right? His family minhag. A minhag is something more than just what I choose to do. A minhag is a custom.
Right.
Customs are important. Right. We say we have a saying minhag halacha dami. Minhag is sort of comparable to a halacha, meaning that sometimes it has a very strong identity in itself. That it's so strong that we can't just move it aside and say, well, it's just a minhag, I'm going to do away with it. On the other hand, you can be a little more flexible with a minhag than you are with, and it's very possible that the husband decides to change his minhag because I don't know, something goes according to his rabbi, like a man might go to school at yeshiva, and his rebbe is doing a different minhag, and he can adopt.
You see that a lot.
You do see it. You do see a lot. So he can adopt a new minhag. So it's possible that they together will decide, you know what, let's go according to the wife's minhag because it's more appropriate for their life. I think it's okay. Yeah, it's not like, it's not unchangeable. Okay. So he has dominion over things of heaven. Minhag is one of those things where he's deciding that. Where the kids might go to school, that might be another area where he has again, if they disagree. The ideal is they're talking about things and they're agreeing, and if they can't come to agreement, he has the final say, let's say. But she has the reign. Her realm is the things of earth, quote unquote, the things of earth, which means all practical matters. Now, first of all, this in itself is a huge area, right? This is not a small thing, all practical matters. But in addition, really, all practical matters when it comes to a Jewish home is spiritual matters. It's all spiritual matters, right? Because anything that happens in the home, anything, that is practical reality of day-to-day life is going to be expressed in a spiritual way. For example, the wife is going to decide, do I want to buy challah from the grocery store or do I want to bake it? If I'm baking challah, then I have an opportunity to show my daughters what it means to take challah, rather than just buying it. So that's a practical matter, but it has a tremendous spiritual repercussion, right? I'm saying that we said that the woman's domain, according to the rabbis, is the things of earth, quote unquote, which is, refers to all practical matters. No, I'm good, thanks. It's under the computer. I got it. No, good. So, is she what kind of clothing is she gonna buy the kids for Shabbos? Is it gonna be a special item or not special item? This is these are practical choices that have spiritual repercussions. What kind of lifestyle are they going to lead in the home? Is the home going to be a place where she fosters mitzvos, love of doing chesed? So there's a tremendous because that's the job of all of us, right? As Jews, is to elevate the physical into the spiritual realm. So when we say that she has dominion over the practical realities of life, that is. That it's not a small thing in the religious sphere as well. It's not a small thing. So now in light of such a view of marriage, where you have each person complementing the other, complementing with an E, right? Agreeing to matters. So now we can understand this statement from Talmud. The statement from Talmud says, a proper wife does the will of her husband. So now we just said that she's not obeying blindly. So what does this mean, to obey the will of her husband? Okay, so we have to understand that it doesn't mean she's his servant. So if she's not his servant and she's not blindly obeying his will, what does it mean? It has to mean, Heller says, it has to mean something related to the idea of what is the meaning of, what's the definition of the word will? Okay, so now she's explaining a little bit of that. So she says a person's deepest will is really to do the will of God, right? We say that our neshama, our souls, come directly from the God essence, right? From God himself, and that piece of us, inside of us, the neshama, really yearns to do mitzvos, right? The whole problem, as it were, of being alive is that our soul and our body are in conflict with each other. Our soul wants to do good. Our soul wants to do a mitzvah, but it's the Yetzer Hara that the body, right, that wants to not do good. We are contradictory beings because we're made both physically and spiritually, right? So we say that a person really, really, really deeply wants to do God's will. That's really their essence. Okay. She says that the word ratzon, Hebrew word for will, ratzon, has the same root as the word for channel or conduit. So our will is a conduit for the divine will. In other words, and when we daven, when we pray, we often say, that how should we be praying? What should we be praying for? Not God, please help me because I want this, or do my will, or I would like this, but rather, please do for me whatever it is that you know is best for me. In other words, my will should be your will, and your will is it should be the same. That's what we're striving for. So this idea that our deepest will is really to do what God wants from us is reflected in what happens sometimes in the case of divorce, or in the case of a recalcitrant husband who doesn't want to give his wife a get. So we say in a situation like that a beis din, the rabbinical court, has the right to try to force, really pressure a husband into giving his wife a get, to the extent that they're allowed to beat him up, right? So, but then the question is, now we know also, yeah. And there have been.
I just have this picture of Rabbi Borman.
Well, he doesn't. He sends his thugs.
Oh, he says
He doesn't do it himself. They don't do it. The rabbinical court sends messengers, people who would do it for them. They wouldn't actually, hold my hat. Right. So they are allowed to do that. So, but we also know. We know though that a man has to give a get willingly, or it's not valid. So then you have a contradiction here, seemingly. How can he give it willingly if he's being beaten up until he says, okay, I'll give it? So the answer is, the rabbis say like this, really, his deepest will, he really, really, truly wants to give her the get. Because, as we're saying, his deepest, the person's deepest will is to do what God wants of him. But his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, is getting in the way of doing what he knows he really wants to do. So we are just helping him see the light. We're just helping him see what he really, to get to his deepest essence. So in other words, that's how they answer that problem. That in other words, we're not by beating him up, we're not forcing him to do it. We're really just freeing that neshama, that little pintaliyid, that little spark inside him that really wants to give, but his ego or his anger or whatever, his Yetzer Hara, however it's expressing itself, it's just preventing him from doing it. Okay? So that's the idea, that he really wants to give it, but his Yetzer Hara stands in the way. Now, a helper, as we said before, in the body, in the person of a woman, a wife, is giving what the other person needs or lacks, right? In the case of the navigator and pilot. The navigator is giving what the pilot cannot, offering what the pilot cannot do on his or her own. A wife and a husband, their job is to help each other recognize how they can be conduits for the divine will, to help them serve God rather than their egos. So doing her husband's will means not just bending to his whims, it means helping him see, recognize, and achieve what he spiritually really wants to be doing, what his best self wants to do. Okay? And proof of this is that, if a husband is asking his wife to do something that's not allowed, according to Jewish law, then she's not obligated to just blindly listen. So it's not a matter of just blindly following what he wants. So now we can understand Rashi. There's the famous Rashi on the phrase Ezer Kenegdo, helper against him. Right? Rashi says, what does it mean? Because again, it's a very contradictory phrase. He explains that, quote, if he is worthy, she is a helper. If he is not, she is against him. Meaning, if he's not living up to his spiritual potential, if he is pushing that little divine spark deep down within him and ignoring it, right, then she is going to have to go against his stated will to fight his Yetzer Hara. So it's going to seem like she's butting heads with him. Why?
Say that again.
Yes.
If he is worthy, she is a helper. If he is not,
she is against him. That's what Rashi says. That's a quote from Rashi. So again, it's going to, in other words, if he's not doing what he should be doing, if he's not on the right track, then what she's doing, let's say he's lazy about going to study Torah. Every man is supposed to set aside a certain time for studying Torah. He's lazy about it, doesn't go. And she's nagging him not nagging him because that's not the right way to go about it, but she is gently reminding him, honey, isn't it time for this rabbi's shir tonight? So he's going to feel, because his neshama wants to do it, but his Yetzer Hara is like, leave me alone already. Right? So it's going to feel to him like she's against him. Right? That's what Rashi means, that it says that phrase means. So if he, of course, then again, she should not be doing anything like a nag. Because that's just
a conduit.
right.
That too.
Well, part of the right. I'm helping you find your. Oh, okay, right. Well, part of the way she has to be able to be smart about it is to find the way, and it's not always that easy. It's not easy. Sometimes very hard. You really do want to encourage and support, but if you say the wrong word sometimes, or if you say it in the wrong tone of voice, it can be. Sometimes, and a lot of it has to do with just. A lot of times something is. I would say I might say something, and it'll sound to my husband just like his mother. Nag, even though it has nothing to do with, but people hear a lot of times this emotional, historical baggage that comes with the relationship, and it's actually a very interesting communication technique to try to, between anybody, but especially between husband and wife, because there's so many times like this where someone says something and the other one hears something completely different, and a lot of the times in the beginning of my marriage, my husband would say. Would recognize that I was hearing something from him that sounded like someone else. I'm not going to say who, but and he would go, "You're hearing so and so now, aren't you?" And I would go, "Yes, you're right. That's why I jumped instead of communicated because So it's very difficult. This whole communication between spouses. Okay. Anyway. And again, we'll come back to the idea that she has a gift of insight that he doesn't have, right? Going back to, again, the verb that the Torah uses to describe how she was created. And the rabbis say, Vayiven, he built the woman, and the rabbis say that means she was given an extra measure of insight, bina, which is the same root as built. And so she has a deeper insight. So therefore, she has more of this ability to try to negotiate those paths of encouragement rather than nagging. This is why the snake in the Garden of Eden approached her rather than Adam, because the snake knew that that Chava has more ability to influence her husband Adam than Adam would have to influence her. And we have a famous story in the Gemara of a righteous couple that divorced, and each of them married a wicked spouse. What ended up happening was that the righteous woman who married the evil guy, changed him and he became righteous. And the righteous man, married the evil woman and he became evil. Okay, I'm using evil and righteous, but the point of the story that the Gemara says is that the woman, the Midrash concludes by saying everything comes from the woman. Okay, so now Heller sees another rationale here for a wife doing her husband's will, and one that comes from sort of psychological realities rather than spiritual realities. She says like this: men and women have different needs in relationship. She says women need love more than they need respect, while men need respect and admiration more than they need love. So she says maybe this is because they're different outlets for self-actualization in the world. Men, generally speaking, they have this, like I said, we've talked about many times about this, the gift of kibush, conquering. They go out and conquer. So their realm of power, their realm of self-actualization is more external, out in the world, right? Doesn't mean that women are not out in the world too, but that's primarily how men find their validation, self-validation, their self-identity, right? And so therefore, their sense of security and self-esteem is subject to greater risk. And so therefore, when they come home at night or when they're in their dealings with their wife, he has a greater need for this respect, admiration. Now, women achieve identity most of the time through relationships rather than, let's say, right? So women relate more, and this is a psychological reality, is that women are more interested in people than things, and men are more interested in things. And so women have greater, we put greater stock in our attachment to others. And so therefore we have a greater need for love. So therefore, doing his will, Heller says, is really more expresses the husband's psychological need. Right. While in many Jewish books, they talk about, like an advice to men is to make sure that your wife feels secure in your love. Right. So that's a different psychological reality. Now, what about a woman's own needs? Right. Does fulfilling her nurturing role to her husband and children mean that she excludes her own needs? Of course not. We know that everyone has their own needs and requirements that you should not ignore. And this balance where you have to attend to your own needs as well as those of others is summed up in Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos says, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? Right? So I have to be for myself, because who is going to stand up for me? Nobody. In the same pasuk, the next verse says, and if I am only for myself, who am I? So there has to be that balance. In that verse, we see the balance. I have to be for myself, and by the way, that's the first thing that it says. But on the other hand, I can't be only for myself. So you have to have that balance, but you do have to pay attention to your own needs. Okay. Heller also says that the roles that are delineated in the role of the Ezer Connecto is a methodology by which she's fulfilling her own spiritual needs. In other words, that's how she achieves that. She gets a spiritual satisfaction, emotional satisfaction from being that Ezer Connecto. For example, you wouldn't say, let's say, if there was a woman who was a nurse, paid position, but it's a nurturing position, right? It's a very nurturing position, or a teacher, or our friend Tatiana who runs a daycare. So she is making her profession out of nurturing. So you wouldn't say that she is unfulfilled just because she's tending to others' needs. She's choosing that role because it's fulfilling for her. So too, Heller says that the role of nurturer and support system for the husband is in itself fulfilling for a woman, in a way that the husband nurturing the wife is not the same kind of fulfillment. And then she says, but look, if there's a woman that does not feel fulfilled in her home and family, there's nothing that just forbids her from going out and, seeking a job in the outside world and outside the community or whatever. There's never been a time in Jewish history where she was not allowed to do other things, right? To focus on other things, if that's what fulfills her. Okay, let's talk about adultery. Let's move. That's the next little topic here in the marriage situation here. So, what is the definition of adultery? Does anybody know? In other words, what relationship defines adultery? What two actors?
Husband and wife.
Well, that.
I mean,
What?
meaning
Let-
that it has to do with violating a marriage.
Okay,
So
you're on the right path.
So I think it is the woman, right? In Jewish law, the man, because didn't we mention?
We did mention it last time. The definition of adultery does depend on the status of the woman.
So a married woman.
A married woman with any other man, not her husband. So
married
married
or single
woman
or
with a
whatever.
single man is adultery. Okay, a single woman with a man, with any other man, married or not married, does not make her an adulteress, right? And it also doesn't make him an adulterer. Yeah, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Married man with a single woman is not adultery, although it's forbidden, right? Okay. So the definition of adultery really rests on the status of the woman. So the question is why? And we'll talk about that in a second. So now the sin of adultery is so severe. It's one of the big three cardinal sins. We have three quote unquote cardinal sins in Jewish law. Adultery, or more generally speaking, prohibited sexual relations, idolatry, worshiping idols, and the third, murder. So Heller, she characterizes these as these three cardinal sins as leading to some death. So murder leads to the physical death, obviously. Idol worship leads to a spiritual death, because if you're sort of casting the one and only God, Creator, aside for other gods, then the whole foundation of the belief system, the whole foundation of the Torah is null and void. And then adultery. What does adultery lead to?
Wait a minute. You
Yeah.
said idolatry is spiritual death.
Right.
What kind of a death is,
Murder?
Physical.
Physical death.
and adultery?
That's what I was just about to say.
Oh, okay.
Death of the
That's-
sanctity of marriage.
Right. So she says the death of the family, which is the basic social unit.
Mm-hmm.
So now, again, cardinal sins, most other mitzvos you can violate in any other situation in order to save a life, right? So gun to your head, someone says, God forbid, I shouldn't point at my head. Gun to the head, eat this ham sandwich or I kill you. You must eat the ham sandwich.
And then you say, well, in that case, I'll take two.
Gun to the head, someone says, turn your computer on Shabbos and go online. You must do it. In other words, you have to preserve your life in order to, because your life is more, in that case, worth more, right, than the mitzvah itself. Gun to your head, you must commit adultery, you have to be killed rather than commit the sin. So those three sins, someone says, gun to your head, kill this person or I kill you, you have to be killed. Right. So now, why is adultery on the woman's shoulders? Why does it depend on her? So she says is very, very interestingly that the sexual act is different for men and women, right? The Torah originally permitted polygamy for a man, didn't encourage it, by the way, discouraged it, but permitted it, because the psychological reality is that men are capable of carrying on different relationships, simultaneous relationships, in a way that women are not. Don't you ever wonder about those, they have these
Shows on TV.
about the,
Two
and you always
wives,
wonder about
yeah.
the women, the women, the wives, like sister wives, whatever.
Yeah.
I always wonder, you have to wonder, right? Like, how do they
So
actually do that?
weird.
It's a little weird. Not for him, but for her, it's a little weird. So like, the stereotypical situation, the husband comes home and the wife says, "You're having an affair, I know it." And the husband's typical reply is, "It meant nothing to me."
Yeah.
Odds are that he's being honest. In other words, sex has a different value to the man sometimes. It's not an necessarily emotional act. For her, it's almost always an emotional act. Even though feminists lately, over the past 20, 30 years, have been trying to wean women away from that involvement in the emotional entanglement, because they want women to be just as crude as and free sexually as men. And whether or not that works, I'm not sure. But in any event, I think human nature is different here in this case, and that's what she's saying as well. So Judaism doesn't condone infidelity, right? But it does recognize that there are different psychosexual realities. So for a man, the sexual act doesn't necessarily carry with it such an import. Now, so what happens is, so what that means is, if a woman gives herself physically to a man that's not her husband, this has a reality for her that just in a very real way destroys the emotional connection she has with her husband. That's the issue. That if she's giving herself physically to another person, she's giving herself emotionally to that person, and maybe spiritually to that man, right? So it really is a breach of the relationship in a way that a man's infidelity is not. You could also say that she's the foundation of the home. If she has her attentions elsewhere, then it really does upset the emotional reality of that entire home. And so that's her answer for why it rests on the woman. So now and this is, of course,
Well, that argument I think you could say for some men though too, because the argument about like how it affects the whole home and everything like that. I mean,
I don't know. Don't we hear stories about men who carry on affairs for years without the wife knowing, without the wife suspecting, without nothing changing? I mean, it may be the case that women also, but I'm saying, I don't know if it's the same, if it has the same effect. I don't know. That's,
but there's probably some women that are carrying on with the men don't have to. I mean, it could happen.
yeah,
know what you're saying.
for sure. Oh,
But
for
I
sure.
guess what I was saying is that it comes out, right? Like, I think there's, for some, I mean, it's destroy. You can't, he can say, "Oh, it meant nothing," but for her, it's
You're
like,
saying it still destroys the family.
yes, that's what I'm saying. Like,
Right.
it could just as easily destroy.
For her. In other words, from her point of view, how could you do this to me? How could you do this to us? How could you do this to the family? How could you do this to our kids?
Right.
Right?
Right.
Right. Why? Because in her mind, that is what an affair means. That you've now destroyed us, and I'm devastated.
Right.
Whereas for men, and I don't know if I don't know if there are any studies that show like what is the reactions of husbands to their wives' affairs. Like, is it as devastating to them emotionally? It's a good question, but I just don't get the impression that it would be as emotionally devastating to a man. Like, it would be interesting to see how what is the proportion of husbands forgiving their wives and moving forward versus wives forgiving their husbands and moving forward. So the point is, if she is engaging in an affair, for her that means I no longer am invested in my marriage in the same way, and in the family and my husband in the same way that I was before.
Cheat way more than women.
Mm-hmm. No, that's probably
Which
true.
is to your
Absolutely,
point, that
yeah.
It's
Right,
not as
right.
Well, my husband was in that situation, and it was devastating for him. Not to be personal, I'm sorry, but that happened to him. And he was on the other side, and it was pretty much the end for him. He tried to, whatever,
Right.
kids or whatever.
Right.
It just,
Right.
that was it. Like, there was no more trust. There was
No,
more
for sure.
anything.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what
Yeah.
you're saying, that the female side
Right.
react
Right.
for him.
Right.
It was,
Okay. So again, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Personality, I
Right.
guess, of a
Could be.
man.
Right.
Or how they.
Yeah, but
What's
it doesn't.
important.
Right. He could be an exception. He could
Right.
not. I don't know.
Right.
I'm just saying this is what the Torah is. And now the Torah is.
Well, why don't we find out? Well, I'll report back.
So
We'll do our own little experiment.
this idea of the totality of this act, an affair, having on the marriage, is played out in the sota ceremony. So let's talk about sota, the Isha sota. You know what the sota is? So the Isha sota it's a ritual wherein a woman is brought to the temple on suspicion of having committed adultery, right? So we'll just.
No, Lisa's looking at her dog.
So the sota ritual, again, focuses on the woman, right? And again, Heller thinks this is because she has, more than the man, the capacity to understand what marriage means and what a breach of marriage means. This is the idea. On a practical level, it's very devastating to a marriage if a woman is a cheater, for a number of reasons. Number one, if she has a child and they're not sure who the father is, that can be a big problem, right? Could be a major problem. So there are practical issues here too. But basically, let's start by explaining what a sota is. The woman who is accused and brought to the temple and has to go through the sota ceremony is a woman who has already been warned by her husband. She's been seen with a specific man being in a secluded place with him, and her husband has warned her not to do it. And then she's gone and done it anyway. And two witnesses have to see her, and they have to say, I saw her go into this room alone with this man. And so this is not an innocent woman to begin with. This is someone who definitely needs a little booster shot of propriety. She's disregarded her husband's wishes, and she's been guilty of yichud, which means being together in close, in a closed room with another man. That's not allowed. She's married. Okay, so from the Torah, that's not allowed. So this is not an innocent woman who her husband just brings her up on charges, as it were, right? This is someone who's not innocent. Okay, she's guilty of ignoring her husband's wish. Okay, now at this point in the process, when the husband says, I'm accusing you, we're going to the temple, she can choose to divorce him without any further repercussions. He can choose to divorce her without any repercussions. They also, all right, okay, so they have to, they can divorce each other. The whole process of sota is built on the assumption that she's innocent of adultery, right? Because in other words, if she's guilty of adultery, she doesn't want to go to the temple. She knows the repercussions of drinking that sota water. So if she's agreeing to go to the temple, she's innocent. She knows she's innocent, right? She knows she's innocent. So it's understood, and the whole process of the sota ceremony for the woman is to prove her innocence, right? It's not only to help her prove her innocence, we use God's name in the process, right? Think about secular societies or other.
Guilty,
Yeah.
and she knows she's guilty, right? Can she just say, okay,
I'll divorce you.
Yeah.
That's all she needs to say.
So she doesn't have to go through this.
No.
Okay.
It's her. No, absolutely. Like I said, the other option is she tells her husband, "Okay, I'm gonna need a divorce at this point," and the Beis Din will step in and help them do that for sure. But think about in other societies or religions where the husband, if he suspects the wife, could just toss her out on the street. We're not allowed to do that here. Here, the Torah is saying there's a process when you don't have that control, you don't have that power. You suspect something, all right, fine. You saw her go into two witnesses saw her secluding herself with this man that you warned her about. That still doesn't mean she's guilty, and it doesn't give you the power to just toss her out on her ear. You have to go through a legal process. So sota is a legal process, and furthermore, we're going to provide you with a supernatural way to prove that she's innocent. Right. So, it's totally in her favor. The whole point of the process is to prove her innocent. Okay. So she goes to the temple, and by the way, again, at any point she could change her mind and say she'll accept a divorce instead. She's brought to the temple. She offers a barley offering. At the time, barley was considered like an animal food. So this is symbolic, an animal food for, fodder for animals. So the point is that she's sort of acknowledging in her offering that she gave into her lower instincts, right? The priest, the Kohen, removes her head covering, tears her dress, lists to her all the curses that will happen if she's found guilty. She has to swear to accept those curses. Then the curses that also contain God's name, they're written on a piece of parchment. They're dissolved in the sota water. This, by the way, is the only time that we are allowed to erase the name of God on paper in order to prove her innocent. It's such an important ceremony that that shows that Hashem wants to keep this family together, to keep the husband and wife relationship, and he's actually, helping out here in this way, that his name is being used in order to foster trust between a husband and wife. It's a tremendous thing. Okay, she drinks the water, and that also sort of shows that she allowed God's name she was the cause of God's name to be erased. If she's guilty, we know she dies a very conspicuous and painful death. And it's also experienced if she's an adulteress, by the guy that she had the affair with. And if she's innocent, it has no effect. The water has no effect on her, and she's blessed with children. Okay. So, and again, the punishment of the adulteress and the man is the same if it goes that far. So that is the sota. Again, the point is that we're trying to prove the innocence of the woman and trying to foster to encourage the husband and wife to really, love each other again like they did under their chuppah. And Hashem is saying, use my name, not only use my name, erase my name for the sanctity of this marriage, right? I care so much about the innocence and proving her innocence that I'm going to allow my name to be erased, which is a very big deal. And then Heller goes on to talk about divorce, and she talks about, we talked about the get. The process is very simple. If it's a mutually consenting situation, they both have to consent to a divorce. So if it's a mutually consenting thing, they appear before the court. The husband, the court usually urges them to try to find another way other than divorce, especially with kids.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
To bring back Clinton, what exactly is it? Intercourse that you have to have?
For adultery?
Yeah.
Yes.
It has to be intercourse.
Uh-huh.
It can't be everything else.
Everything else, right. Correct. Okay. So he has the man has to hands the woman the document, the contract, as it were, the divorce contract, just like he handed her the marriage contract under the chuppah. He's the one that has to present it, because he's the one that presented the contract to her under the chuppah. In other words, you have to do the undoing of the marriage just the way you did the beginning of the marriage. So in the beginning of the marriage, he's the one that gives the ksuba, the contract, and the ring, and she accepts it. So too here. Now, by the way, this is not a chauvinistic thing. All contracts in Jewish law happen the same way, with one party offering the document, the contract, to the second party, who is in that ceremony passive. The acceptance by the second party of the contract indicates that party's the second person's willingness to abide by the contract and all of the stipulations therein. So that's the way we do it in Jewish law all the time. So it's not a man-woman thing. It's not a chauvinistic thing. Okay. It's also important, by the way, that it's the man that presents the divorce document, because there can't be any ambiguity that he divorced his wife. Now, this is not really important for him. It's important for her. It's to protect her. Because if there's any doubt whatsoever that he gave his wife a divorce, that he was the one to initiate it, and she accepted it, if there's any doubt, then that can have terrible repercussions if she wants to remarry. Because if she then remarries, and there's doubt about her first divorce, then her marriage relationship is potentially adulterous. So there has to be absolute clarity, so therefore he has to be the one to give it.
So before she drinks the water, he has to...
No, we're not talking about sota anymore.
Oh.
Sota's finished. We're talking about just Jewish divorce. Okay, I'm just talking about how every divorce happens. All right, from the beginning of going to the court, rabbinical court. Okay, now at the same time, because as a contractual partner, the wife had to accept the marriage contract and the ring under the chuppah in order for that to be valid. You can't have a marriage where it's not a legally binding marriage if the wife does not physically accept the ksuba and the ring. So too, it's not a binding divorce unless she accepts the contract, the divorce contract. So you do have situations, by the way, of the recalcitrant wife, where the wife refuses to accept the get. You can have most of the time it's the other way around, but sometimes you do have this situation. It has to be done by both of them. She cannot unilaterally say she's divorced, and he can also not unilaterally say, like in the Muslim, don't they say, I divorce you, and that's it. She doesn't have a say in it. She must have a say in it in Jewish law. Okay, so, and then she makes a point about how, she talks a little bit about the rabbinical courts and why they can't do more. And she says they're really not to blame, especially in America, for not being able to help more. They do try to do what they can in most situations to really pressure the husband to give a get if he's the one who doesn't want to give it. But their hands are tied. I mean, and that's because of civil law, right? Civil law says if you beat somebody up, you're going to get sued for assault. Right. So they don't have much power here. Right. In Israel, interestingly enough, the rabbinical courts have tremendous power in enforcing the husband. They can freeze his bank accounts. They take away his passport and his driver's license. They can throw him in jail. They have legal authority to really pressure the husband. So it's a little bit different. Okay.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
So they have no ability to pressure him?
Here?
Yeah, because
They have
the United States law?
Yeah, I mean, again, I mentioned before that...
They can't send the funds.
Right. Because then the husband will sue them and have them thrown in jail. Whereas in previous eras, where the rabbinical courts were, let's say, in their own little shtetls, nobody would call, the civil authorities, right, the secular authorities, because the rabbinic court is doing something like, what I'm saying, different.
What she's not addressing is the courts that rule on behalf of the man.
Well, because sometimes it is. I mean, it's not always black and white where the husband is always wrong and the wife is always right.
But there were cases where the husband was absolutely a pedophile, and the courts ruled.
You know what? I don't know. People claim a lot of things, and there's always two sides of a story. And I don't know that anything is that black and white. I highly doubt that if the rabbinic court is going to side with a pedophile. I mean, what's the point? That the pedophile doesn't want to give the divorce? I don't understand.
This book, they have documentation.
Which book?
True story book. Yes.
Okay,
These are
I
women who have been working in the field for years as therapists and as dealing with these women. They call the aguna.
Right. So I tend to put my faith in the individuals on a rabbinic court. Because if they are Torah-fearing and, God-fearing men, then the likelihood is that they're doing everything that they are doing in terms of trying to help the woman.
Well,
if it's a situation
from our own
where
experience with the Beis Din, it was extremely corrupt when we had a Beis Din with the rabbi, and it was extremely corrupt.
okay, I can't speak to that. I'm
So
saying
I can't say that I have.
okay. In your experience, wasn't okay. And again, I would also point out that, I really can't speak to it. I can only say that your experience is, you know what? I'm not gonna put my, no, I'm not gonna go there. I don't know.
Except it
I don't know.
seems to happen that way.
I
Huh?
mean, Jerry Lerman is not a person who's going to call a Beis Din corrupt. But
Okay, I'm not going to speak to that because I really don't know anything of the case. I moved here after.
all right.
I know what you're referring to, the situation you're referring to. I'm not going to get into that. Okay. Finally, there's one. She ends the chapter on housework. Okay, housework. Housework. So the chapter is about marriage. She says housework is not in Judaism a glorified. You have to be a perfect homemaker and the floors should shine and meet your husband at the door with in your best dress, and although that doesn't hurt, but that's not, the happy homemaker, which was the image she started the book with so many months ago, and talking about how that became the secular ideal in the 1950s of the woman who bakes the perfect moist bundt cake and has the shiniest floors. That was never a Jewish ideal. In other words, housework is not part of her marriage contract. It's not part of her duties per se. In fact, if they can afford it, the husband must hire help for her to do the housework. She could even bring him to court over this. So if they're financially able to do it and she wants housework help, then he has to give it to her. So, but at the same time, Heller says, it shouldn't be seen as a menial, low kind of task. And think about it this way. We always say that our homes are comparable to the temple in Jerusalem, right? So there in the temple, you had priests, Leviim and Kohanim, who had very menial jobs. They had to, clean the temple, and they had to sweep out ashes from the altar. They had to polish, things. They had to clean things. They had to mix. They had to grind recipes for incense. I mean, they had very menial tasks to do. And again, it was seen as, as a way of, if you understand, let's put it this way, if you understand the home as a sacred place, a place, a respite and haven for your family, you take pride in it. You take pride in wanting to make it as nice an environment as you can. That's all. So it shouldn't be looked at. Well, she says it's not, we're never elevated housework to her duty per se. It's never should be seen as something beneath us to do, because it's part of creating what goes into creating a beautiful home that serves Hashem. And that's it. Alrighty.